Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Caraman. With me, the mayor of Defiance. No, that's a different show, but I don't know if you ever saw it, Miles. Miles Taylor joins us to talk about some of the wonderful problems of the Donald Trump administration. And as a veteran of the first administration, Miles knows better than most. And Miles, I wanted to talk to you about, I brought you here to talk about seizing of ballots, but
Yeah,
today Caroline Levitt let us know that Donald Trump was just joking when he said he might get rid of the midterm elections, as he was said he
sure.
was just joking about seizing ballots. I've got a list of things he says that that were jokes that became true. I'm sure your list is longer. It's all yours.
Look, and we should run through some of these, Brian. I will
Go
say at the
for it.
top end, though, that look, in my experience, Donald Trump was always joking until he wasn't.
Right.
And staff always cover for him and say his most outlandish proposals are just jokes, when in reality, for Donald Trump, they are trial balloons.
Yes.
And if he gets a bad reaction, then it's a joke and he delays the actual action. If he doesn't get too bad of a reaction, the joke becomes the reality and he does it very, very rapidly. That's what he does. And let me give you an example, because I put a few of these together the other month, and I needed to make this so clear to folks, because once again, people were saying that Donald Trump was joking about designating the political opposition as terrorists, and he wasn't. And he instituted what's called NSPM 7 to start designating people as domestic terrorists based on ideology. We've now seen that already become a part of the national discourse. But it started as a joke. And here are the few of the ones that I wrote down, Brian. I wrote to our followers at defiance.org. Remember when Donald Trump joked about locking up his political opponents? Well, he came into office, and it's very clear that wasn't a joke anymore. In fact, at the time, Kellyanne Conway said, no, he doesn't wish to pursue charges. He's just joking. Well, she was proven wrong. Remember when Donald
Well, she
Trump
was proven wrong
joked?
about a lot of stuff, but go ahead.
That's right. I wrote here, remember when Donald Trump joked that he wanted to buy Greenland or swap it with Puerto Rico. In fact, at the time, people called it an April Fool's joke. Now here we
Yes.
are. We're literally talking about France and Germany and Sweden sending troops to Greenland to defend it against a possible invasion. Doesn't look like a joke anymore. Donald Trump also, quote, joked that the FCC should look into comedians who were making fun of him. In 2019, he said this, and staff said, well, that's just a joke. He doesn't really mean it. Well, he comes back into office and threatens to do exactly that. Has Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert and others looked into and has threatened those networks. You could go on and on. Trump joked during the pandemic about slowing down testing. It was a joke until he said that he really didn't kid and he wanted to slow down testing. He joked about not accepting the election results in 2020. And then, of course, we saw that he was serious when he prevented the peaceful transfer of power. He joked, Brian, about sending the military into U.S. cities. And staff said that was absolutely not true. That was the quote. He wasn't going to do it. Now look what's happened in the second term. It's been all about deployments of troops and U.S. forces into American cities. And he's joked very recently and in the past about remaining in the presidency beyond his term and a third term. And I will tell you, consistent with these jokes about canceling elections, this is not a joke. I remember him praising Xi Jinping in China and saying he's now president for life. Maybe we'll have to give that a shot someday. And Trump's allies, they're all in on the joke. They continue to say Trump 2028. I guess it's up to us whether we decide to be fooled by that.
Well, few of those I was there and witnessed myself, the not accepting the elections. I asked that question and he said, you don't count the results, there won't be a change of power. And that was 6 weeks before the election. He always starts out as trial balloons. And that's one thing and he's joked about staying. Now, he also joked, one of the things he also joked about, and I was there in the White House when he did, was about implementing the Insurrection Act. And yet today in a Truth Social media post, he's very dead serious about violating the Posse Comitatus Act yet again and putting military on the ground. He has done that, as you said. He joked about it, but this is Not is I guess my question is America over? Is the United States of America, the democracy that we are now celebrating 250 years of, is it over? He's violated due process. He's put military on our own soil. He's locked up his opponents. He blames liberal Democrats and radical Democrats for all the violence in Minneapolis, but that place wasn't violent till he got there. And none of the police that are there are acting as police; they're acting as military insurgents who view, the American citizenry as the enemy. When a reporter asked in the briefing room today, how can you say that ICE is right all the time when they've locked up, detained, and shot and killed Americans? We were told that we're crooked for asking those questions. So to you have the Defiance hat on. And so is America as we've known and loved it, is it over with?
I would say this: we live in a democracy. The president has gone from wannabe dictator to actual dictator. And whether we start living in a dictatorship is directly correlated to how we respond to Donald Trump's moves. If we let him defy the United States Constitution to have his own personal police force, if we let him blow past the Bill of Rights on an almost weekly basis, if we let him defy the laws passed by Congress without any approbation, if we let him defy court orders, well, then yes, Brian, very much without exaggeration and not said in jest, we will be living in a dictatorship. And each of those things I mentioned are being tested right now, some of them
Every
at this
day.
very moment. And, if people want me to put numbers to it, you could say, look, these are the rantings of a disgruntled employee who worked for Donald Trump. Well, then let me put numbers against it. Last year, federal judges of both stripes, including ones appointed by Donald Trump, ruled that he violated the Constitution more times than any president in their entire term in modern history, in just year one of his second term. Okay, statistically, this is arguably the most lawless presidency in modern American history, potentially ever. And that's, again, I'd say about a third of those are conservative judges that Donald Trump or his Republican predecessor appointed. We are talking not about a bunch of liberal activist judges, which is what my former party always says in these moments. This is serious stuff. I mean, you could check off the amendments that these federal judges say have been blown past. Huge First Amendment violations and Fourth Amendment violations and 14th Amendment violations and 10th Amendment violations. Yeah. I mean, the guy is just slashing through constitutional protections, not to mention the structural aspects of the Constitution, i.e., Congress passes a law. Donald Trump pretends the law doesn't exist. Donald Trump has no accountability. Those things are now happening with regularity. So look, that's how I would characterize it, Brian, is that's what I think you have to look at. Is the Constitution being respected? Is it operational or not? And right now, that's the threat. It's not Democrats and Republicans. We can't be up in arms about every populist Republican thing that Donald Trump wants to do. He was elected president. He can do shitty things if he wants to. What he's not allowed to do is violate the United States Constitution.
Two questions come to mind from your statement. First of all, when you say we, you've got to see Congress do something, don't you? I mean, that would be when we say we have to do something about it. Congress has been ineffective and neutered by Donald Trump. And secondly, and most importantly, I don't give a shit if you're a disgruntled employee. I give a shit if you're presenting me facts. And so they frame the argument as if they can negate what you're saying just because you are a former employee, disgruntled employee, and they dismiss you without ever looking at the facts that you present, which is, I get tired of people trying to frame that argument. You are a disgruntled employee. I don't give a shit. I care if you're giving me facts. So I respect the facts. I don't care where they came from. It's applying the scientific method to mass communication. Seek out the facts. You've got them. So I'm with you.
Well, look, I mean, another example of this, Brian, is amidst the scattershot set of controversies that come out of the White House every single day, people have not given enough attention to the fact that the president, just in a speech this week in front of the Detroit Economic Club, said that
Yes.
starting February 1st, if you live in a blue state that has a sanctuary city, you will no longer be getting federal funds. And that
Yes.
means money to protect you against terrorist attacks, social services, transportation, infrastructure, money you pay in every single month in your paycheck to go to the federal government to come back and help your state and help you. If you're in a blue state, your life is now worth less to the president of the United States. He's going to cut that money off. You don't need to be a lawyer to know that the next thing I'm going to say is true. That is blatantly, completely, and totally unconstitutional and a deeply impeachable offense. Why? Because, well, many reasons, but one of the reasons is you're protected by the Constitution's 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause that says you as an American, because of your political views, cannot be treated differently by your government just because you disagree with who is in power. They can't say we're going to deny you FEMA aid when your house is burning down because you live in Illinois, since Chicago's a sanctuary city. That is fundamentally unconstitutional and, like I said, impeachable. If Donald Trump does this on February 1st, and I have no doubt he will try, that's
He's
it,
not
man.
joking.
One more impeachable offense on your list. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. That is not a precedent we want to set in this country.
But to the point, it is an impeachable offense, but impeaching Donald Trump is not going to happen. Most members of Congress that I speak to say the best chance of that happening is after the midterms, if we have a free and fair midterm election, and we can talk about that. You know, I'm sure we'll have one like Russia has elections. I'm not sure it'll be free and fair, but I'm sure he'll try the Insurrection Act or martial law in blue cities or states to keep down voter participation. I believe all that is indeed possible. But to the point, I don't think we see, there are three ways that this, four ways. He ends at the end of 2028 and goes away, which I don't think the MAGA movement will. He might. He could die in office. That's a potential. They could 25th Amendment his ass, but I don't see that. And finally, impeachment. And I don't see impeachment until after the midterms, and I still don't think we'll see it unless we can get, as I've talked to members of the Senate and Congress and the House, they're whipping votes now. And I think if we do see an impeachment effort, they've whipped the votes and they know they can convict in the Senate. Otherwise, I don't think, I think we're destined to, as Mary Trump says, endure each day with Donald Trump being worse than the next. But
look, the only caveat I would add is it depends on what he tries to do in these midterm elections. And you're not talking about, are there 15 Republican senators who may change their perspective? You're talking about, are there a tiny handful who might change their perspective based on what happens in the midterms? And I mean that in a couple of ways. One,
they're looking for 6 to be.
Yeah, if Donald Trump meddles in the midterms in such a way that so shocks the conscience of the public, like a January 6th style event, that could contribute to a few of those people going on to the other side of the ledger. But also, people tend to be braver when they lose elections. You may have members of Congress that lose those races that in that time period still have the ability to vote, who could potentially flip sides. There's a number of things that could happen. And Brian, we are, of course, seeing the president now talk in such a way that we can anticipate he will engage in January 6th level attempts to disrupt the 2026 midterm elections. He has talked about canceling those elections now multiple times in 1 week. And he has said in 2020, he regrets not seizing ballot boxes after that election. That one should be a massive wake-up call. And I wrote about it this past week because there was a little tiny problem with his claim that he should have seized those ballot boxes, which is that I wrote the executive order that he claims gives him the power to do that. And I can tell you unequivocally, without any attachments, it does not give him any such power. In fact, just to be very specific about it, there's an EO that we wrote in an executive order in 2018 called EO 13848. We basically wrote this as the response to Russian interference in our elections in 2016. We said we cannot let that happen again. The president of the United States needs a big swinging bat to hit any foreign adversary with if they try to meddle in our elections. And you won't be surprised by this, Brian. Donald Trump really didn't want to sign that executive order. He was like, no,
I'm
we
shocked.
don't need to punish the Russians. We don't need to punish people for interfering in our elections. And we said, no, Mr. President, we have got to send a signal of deterrence. Sign this executive order, and it says any foreign adversary that meddles in our elections, we will punish them severely with sanctions and visa revocations and all of these different things. Trump begrudgingly signed the document. Fast forward, in 2020, the legal flunkies around him said, well, we think that document gives you the ability to claim that there was a manipulation of our election. You can go seize ballot boxes. Anyone can Google it and pull it up. It doesn't say a damn thing like that. There ain't a line in that executive order that gives him that power. I could go on and on about it. But my point here, Brian, is if Donald Trump even attempts to put his grubby little hands on ballot boxes, he will have broken the law. And unfortunately for him,
Well,
these
he does
won't
that
just
every
be
day, Miles.
he does it every day, but these won't just be the federal laws he thinks he can pardon himself and his team for committing. These are state laws.
State laws.
These are state laws where the president has no pardon power. So I almost dare him and his team to go try to put their hands on those ballot boxes, because they will get sued into oblivion in state courts across the country with no magic wand to say that they are pardoned from those criminal offenses.
Sounds like you still have some hope of surviving Donald Trump with an intact democracy.
I have some hope at testifying in those trials against him as one of the former authors of that executive order. So, I hope that happens at some point. And you may have lost me on video here for a second, Brent. Hold on, let me turn it back on, see if it works. Device is struggling to record. Oh, I don't know what that means.
I had a date like that once. Oh, I'm telling you, tough road.
Oh, let me see if I can get it to come back up. What's going on, computer? Can you see me okay?
I hear you. You're kind of frozen with your hand next to your ear.
No, that's just how I sit.
Okay, that's
yeah.
So, all right, let me ask you this question, if you're up for it. And
yeah.
All right. So here, my question to you is: when he talks about invoking the Insurrection Act in Minneapolis and Minnesota, you're stopped recording. Something went wrong, and they're not recording anymore. Please refresh, then rejoin from a regular browser. Now there you are.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, it's the feds. They didn't like our conversation, Brian. But
I'm telling you, it's the NSA.
Shit, I got a lot of ways to log in.
It's the DOJ. The FBI is going to raid us. The other thing that all right, so this week he talks about invoking the Insurrection Act, which I think is antithetical. He raided a Washington Post reporter's house. I've had my newsroom raided before and had to go to jail to defend a confidential source. Even then, they never raided my home. Is there your hope? You have the hat on, Defiance. You say we have to do something about it. What do we have to do?
Well, on the rating, this is something you and I talked about months ago. I think as far back as August, you and I and others were talking about how there was likely to be in 2026 the start of a campaign from the administration to raid reporters' homes and their records. And at that time, we felt like many of those actions had probably already started in the background. In other words, the administration trying to go gain access to reporters' accounts to suss out their sources. This is now happening. This was foreseeable. And I'll tell you, there's a very personal connection to it, because after Donald Trump issued his executive orders to investigate me and my former colleague, Chris Krebs, whose crime was saying that the 2020 election was free and fair and secure, the Attorney General cited both of our executive orders and said, pursuant to those executive orders, we're going to rescind DOJ policy to offer additional First Amendment protections around journalists. We're going to rescind that policy, and we are more open as a department to investigating journalists after we go after these people. So I have no doubt, Brian, and that was a pretty on-the-nose thing to do. I have no doubt they tried to identify journalists that I'm friends with and to start to investigate them. And the same thing with Chris Krebs, but they used that as an excuse to revoke those protections, which signaled to me the administration was going on the warpath against journalists. As you've said to me many times before, the only constitutionally protected profession. That is now happening. The wheels of injustice take a little bit of time to turn. They've now turned, and this is by no means going to be the first one. You are going to see more Washington Post reporters and AP reporters and new media reporters and people investigated by this administration. Many of them are already under investigation, and they do not know it. So what can we do about it? Well, you mentioned Congress. Congress needs to have its hair on fire, but we're not going to be counting on them anytime soon, which is why we launched an organization to start to do more on this front. We launched something called Defiance.org, basically to be a club of Americans across the country that every single week take actions to fight back against these abuses of power. Again, not, this policy or that policy we don't like from Donald Trump, the literal abuses of power, the unconstitutional things that are happening, the threats to things like the First Amendment by going after journalists. And so we're just one of, I think, a lot of different efforts that you are seeing underway in this country to start holding the administration accountable. But you got to start somewhere. And so, yeah, we're trying to crowdsource those actions, whether it is offering legal support and defense to journalists who are under siege, offering legal support to members of the military who believe they've been on the receiving end of illegal orders, offering support on the ground in places like Minnesota for people to document ICE's abuses of power across the board. Every single week, we do something different on that front, and we both crowdfund it and crowdsource actions to push back against it.
I like that idea. I wonder, here's my question. Will it be, I mean, it's the only thing that you can do at this point, but I always encourage people, look, I've covered a lot of these No King rallies. I've covered a lot of protests. One of the questions I always ask protesters, Miles, is, I see, how many hours are you spending out here today? Well, we'll be out here for 8 hours, 9 hours. That's great. Did you vote? And usually I get about half the people didn't vote. What's the point of voting? Well, a good 35, 40% of registered voters didn't vote in the last election. I wonder if it's going to make any difference if we don't get our asses together and go to the polls. And I'm concerned that his efforts, and I think his efforts, will lead to, I think that'll be different than what he surmises will be the outcome. I believe he thinks that if he strong arms people, they won't vote. And I've seen people now who said, I haven't voted before. I go, yeah, if you'll spend 8 hours protesting, why wouldn't you spend a couple just going to vote?
Here's my prediction. If we don't have a free and fair election in 2026, it's not Donald Trump's fault. It's our fault, because Donald Trump doesn't actually have the powers and authorities and the wherewithal to go hijack an election. He actually doesn't. Now, he can try, but he doesn't have those permissions. But he also doesn't need to do that to influence an election. All he needs to do is bear hug the tried and true tactic of voter suppression to flip the election. This is what has happened many times in our country's history, including to Black Americans in the South who are very familiar with what voter suppression looks like. It can take many forms, but the underlying tactic is figure out what population you don't want to vote, make it really hard for them to vote, discourage them from voting, beat them down. And this, in a country that doesn't have very many competitive races anymore, means you don't have to do it across America. You have to pick those key congressional races and say, how can I make the opposition scared to vote, make it harder to vote? And that's things like placing people at the polls with guns, ICE agents, National Guard, scare that little old lady from coming out to vote. That means fake messaging, having the Department of Homeland Security come out and say, we don't think mail-in voting is safe anymore. They can't end mail-in voting. The states are in charge of that, but they certainly can go out there and say, we think it's too scary, you better not do it. And their hope is to get a couple hundred or a couple thousand people who would decide that election to just not come out and vote, and they can throw that election. That's why it's up to us, Brian, because when that happens, it's going to be up to the American people to tell their friends and their neighbors, no, chill out. Here are your rights. You can go safely vote. Here's where you vote. I'll pick you up in a car. You're scared about the guys with guns. They can't do anything to you. They got no right to do anything to you. That's how we keep this election free and fair.
I am so glad you mentioned that. It's more than voting. It's getting people to the polls. It's volunteering in precincts to count the votes, to be precinct captains, to be there outside. We've all got to take an additional step this fall to make sure that the elections remain free and clear and fair. And if we don't, we're screwed. And if we end up getting screwed, I think we've got no one to blame but ourselves. Donald Trump has shown us his hand. We know what he is. And if we don't react appropriately, then the onus is on us. Yes?
It's absolutely right. And there are a lot of very real things that we can do in advance. I would imagine, I strongly suspect we will see attorneys general in some of these competitive battleground states preemptively suing the Trump administration because some of these things that the president is saying, he is already laying a fact pattern.
Yes.
That is a dream scenario for lawyers to say, this guy is going to attempt to meddle in our elections and state law, and federal judges, please issue an injunction to keep him from doing so. So I imagine some of that's going to happen.
Seize the ballot boxes, things like that.
That's right. That's right. These are gifts to lawyers around the country to use to protect their elections. And, he can't help himself. He lays the strategy out there, and he couldn't help himself in 2020. A year before the election, he said, coups are afoot. There's a civil war in the offing. If I lose, it's not because of me. He was telegraphing what he was going to do. He's doing the same thing now. But this time, we're not going to hope for the best and react belatedly to the worst. We are going to react ahead of time. We are preemptively going to protect our elections. And I'm heartened by the fact that there are so many groups spinning up to do this around the country, states getting ready, state officials who now know from hard experience in 2020 what they need to do, and they're getting ready for it. So it's on us, Brian. And I have modest to high confidence that the American people are going to rise to the occasion. And this guy is going to find it's pretty damn hard to rig an American election.
Well, your lips to God's ears. I'm with you on it, my brother. So as we close today, I just want you to spend a little bit of time telling me more about defiance.org, how people can get involved, and what you're attempting to do. You've outlined some of it, but the floor is yours.
Look, we are trying to make this as simple as humanly possible. Folks can go check us out at defiance.org. And like I said, we call it the Club for Courageous Americans. You decide what your member fee is going to be, whether it's $1 a month or $1,000 a month. You decide what you can pay to be a member. And then we pool our collective funds. And every week we go out there and we spend it on a cause that pushes back against a legitimate abuse of power from the Trump administration. So as I noted, a lot of that has been lately going out there and making sure that the people who need to stand up have the legal support they need to as they're persecuted in the Donald Trump revenge campaigns. That's going out there on the ground and protecting people against ICE abuses. I'll give you a couple of examples of this, Brian. A few months ago, one of the things that we did as a club is we funded the largest purchase of whistles, literal whistles, around the country to go send in these ICE communities. And I said to my co-founder at the time, I'll trust you on this, but I don't understand why we're going to go hand out whistles around the country. Is that going to make any difference? Well, now go Google whistles and immigration. Almost every community where there are these ICE raids, people are now blowing the whistle literally to warn their community members that the area is about to get a lot less safe. In fact, if you watch the video of Renee Nicole Good's execution, what you hear at the beginning of the video are the ICE whistles. This is serious. And I didn't understand it because I don't live in a community that's being targeted by ICE raids. If you do, you understand that people need to actually sound the alarm. So we're, I think, the biggest purchaser of those whistles around the country already. We've only existed for 10 weeks as an organization, but things like that matter. And the Know Your Rights trainings we're now doing in frontline communities like Minnesota are really important because also, as you saw with Renee Nicole Good, if there was not people who felt empowered to film it, all we would have is the administration's narrative that a domestic terrorist attack happened, and that would be the end of the story. And it would be that much easier for them to do this in the future. But people had been trained. Here's how you safely and lawfully and defiantly document what ICE is doing. And we got to see the real story with our own eyes. Those things are important. And so we're making sure that we crowd support those efforts around the country every week where they are needed to keep the offense on this administration from a constitutional perspective.
Yeah, and I'll close with this before we take off. I know you've got to go, but here's the thing. That particular incident, right, the shooting of Renee Good, the murder, the execution, I understand the propensity for people to want to dissect the milliseconds in the video, right, and go, was he there? Was he there? But I want people to understand, from covering crime for 40 years, being on America's Most Wanted for 5, riding with police officers, talking to police. This was not a police action. This is not a political problem. This is a procedural problem and a mission statement problem. They have put people in the street that are acting as military, paramilitary units instead of police. And there are procedures before and after a police-involved shooting that they did not follow. And thankfully, that was documented on tape. Not just the shooting, but what happened prior to and after. They did not follow proper police procedures. Ask any police officer. And after the fact, after that shooting, Miles, the officer involved in that shooting left the scene with his weapon. There is no police department in this country that would allow that to happen. They would turn over their gun to their partner. They would wait until someone came to investigate them, and they would be off duty. In fact, this guy got dragged, a month ago? He shouldn't have been on duty that day. The federal government, you can see from the video and from their own statements, failed procedurally. And they failed not only the citizens of the United States and Renee Good, but they failed their own people they put in the streets. As a police officer told me, your job is to make sure that you don't escalate an event to the point where you have to justify killing an innocent human being. And they did not do it. And that was the part of the videotape that I found most telling. And so everyone who took those videos, including the dumb officer who did the shooting, who's walking around, hey, I couldn't let her go. Why? You had a videotape of her license plate, you moron. This is all escalation, because I think at the end of the day, I don't know if Donald Trump actually wants to, I don't know if he actually wants to declare martial law. I don't know if he actually wants to invoke the Insurrection Act in those blue areas. But I will only say that if he does, he could take no better action or more definitive action than what ICE has done, which is to terrify the American populace. And I've never seen this in 40 years of covering crime. And I wish you all the luck in trying to get that documented.
Well, he does want to do it. He will do it. We will defy him and we will defeat him. That's my prediction, Brian. And I appreciate you as always, my friend. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for continuing to shine a light. And let's keep the conversation going, brother.
Always. This is Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Kiram. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.